Hi, I'm Misty Love, and I've been set free from so many strongholds in my life. I was an addict to alcohol, marijuana, meth, men. I hated myself. I lived in depression and anxiety. Growing up, I was saved when I was 12, but my parents did claim to be Christians, and they just didn't know what surrendering to the Lord really looked like. They were addicts and alcoholics, and there was a lot of anger and fighting in my house, a lot of turmoil growing up. And we had started going to church when I was 12 because my parents were actually going to get a divorce. My dad had moved out, and when I was younger, we did go to church. When my older brother and sister were saved, they were my half brother and sister, and they didn't have a good relationship with my dad. They were his stepchildren, and I was his firstborn natural child, and so it caused a lot of confusion for me. My brother and sister had a lot of anger towards me because um, they just didn't have the same relationship with my dad as I did. And when they had moved, or my dad had moved out, and so when we started going to church, I did get saved at the age of 12. I didn't get a foundation in the Lord at that time. We didn't stay in the church for very long. I just knew that Jesus was the way to heaven, and I knew that that was important because that was one thing that they did believe, and they told me about that a lot. So by the time I was 13, I was smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, lost my virginity, and I started smoking pot, which became the biggest stronghold in my life. My parents also smoked pot daily, and it just seemed like it masked the depression and the anxiety and the self-hatred. And so I really became dependent on it at a young age. Just partying on the weekends, drinking, binge drinking, getting my hands on as much pot as I could, always smoking cigarettes. My mom allowed me to do most of these things behind my dad's back. And I really wanted to be in a relationship with a man. I thought that finding love from a guy was going to be the answer to all my problems. So I was always putting myself out there and allowing myself to be used in whatever way that felt like some sort of affection. But when I was 16, I got into a relationship that turned very abusive, and I was in that relationship for 12 years. I actually ended up marrying him. I had 2 children with him. He was physically abusive, emotionally abusive, constantly accusing me of cheating on him, lying to him, very controlling. And I would leave him, and then I would go back to him, and it was just this vicious cycle. We ended up having 2 children together. My mother-in-law, when I was 22, started going to church, and she invited me, and so I ended up going to church with her. And the first night there, I rededicated my life to the Lord. It was a slow process with learning how it really is to surrender to God. I walked the fence for 10 years back and forth. I knew right away that I wanted to no longer do meth. That was my first true conviction. I never really liked meth. I knew it was bad. I saw the evil in it. My husband was a meth addict. He did shoot up. I never did. I just smoked it and snorted it. And he was a severe alcoholic. And so growing up with alcoholic parents, I just wanted to only drink sometimes. And I didn't see anything wrong with smoking pot. It was okay because it was survival mode. So I did get set free from meth addiction, and that caused more issues with our relationship because I was growing in the Lord and he was growing further, and it just put a bigger barrier between the two of us. It took 12 years before I finally left him. It was a lot of memories that I don't really remember them all, but a lot of really seriously bad nights. What finally got me to leave him was he just completely lost it in front of our kids, and he was gonna burn us all up, and throwing stuff and choking me and pushing me. And my kids were 2 and 4, and my 4-year-old son was trying to protect me from him, and my 2-year-old daughter was just completely terrified. And so I remember, making that decision that night that this was it. And so the next day I told him that, he had to leave and that he would never come back. I was going to church at the time, and, I really pressed in, and I became closer with the pastor's wife, and she really helped me through a lot of, learning to be a single mom at that time. But I still had the desire to go out, and I became promiscuous. I had been controlled for so long, so I started going out and to the bars and partying and, having fun, and that definitely led me in the wrong direction. I was, still walking that fence, going to church on Sunday and going to the bar on Friday and Saturday if I could. I had to get a babysitter. But I still wasn't using meth, and I was still smoking a lot of pot. There had been some time in there that I had decided to not smoke pot anymore because I started to realize it was a hindrance with my relationship with the Lord. And so I did make it, 30 days or 60 days, but I would always go right back to it. And I met another guy, and he was very manipulative, and he knew that I had used meth in the past and that I was no longer using. And, he was like, oh, I don't want to use meth anymore. And just very trying to convince me like how perfect I was and how much he wanted to be with me and how much he loved me. We fell in love in a week, which I don't know if I ever loved him, but he tried to convince me that he loved me. And somehow I ended up marrying him in a very short amount of time. And it was the exact same kind of relationship as before. He was abusive, and he was an alcoholic, and he started using meth, and he started using meth in front of me, and I started using meth again. He convinced me to move to Kansas City with him, and I had no friends or family. I didn't have a church, and I got really depressed. My anxiety was really out of control. And one night after we had stayed up all night, the next day I came down. He started drinking really heavily. I went to bed, and he came in and told me that I needed to give his friend a ride like an hour and a half away. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. And so he got really angry, and he left with my car. And when he came back home, he told me I needed to get up out of bed, and I told him no. And he said, well, I'll burn the bed. And he went in and grabbed gasoline and came in and poured it all over the bed. And so I immediately stood up and tried to fight him off and left the house. And I didn't really know where to go. The only people that I knew was his mom and my babysitter. My glasses had gotten broke in the fight, and so I was on foot, and he was driving around looking for me. And I made it to my babysitter's house, but it was like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm covered in gasoline, and I don't really know this lady. My kids weren't home that night, but my stepdaughter was, and I didn't go into her house. I just got really nervous about like, what's she gonna think of me? And this is just chaos. And I'm gonna go back home and just hope that, he chills out. So I went back home and I got in the shower because I had gas all over me. And, he asked me where I'd been, and I lied and I said I went to the gas station and I called my parents and that my mom was gonna be coming in hopes that that would, make him calm down. So I went in my kid's bedroom at that time, and I did have a phone in there. I don't know how I got the phone in there, but I did because he was becoming more and more out of control. And so I knew that I was either going to have to call my parents or the cops. And I ended up calling the police, and then I called my parents, and the police came and arrested him. And my mom came and took me to her house. I stayed at their house for a couple nights, and I went back to the city to my house because I had a job delivering pizzas, and I said I needed to go to work. Well, my brother had given me some Valium, and I took it that night, and somehow I ended up calling my husband, and he came back home, and we ended up getting back together. And so because I had called the police and he was on parole from a DUI, the parole officer said that I needed to go to counseling and that he needed to go to anger management. And if we both did those things, then we could live together again, because I guess we convinced her that he was going to be living at his mom's. And so I started going to counseling. And this lady was a godsend. She encouraged me. She helped me to realize the reality of where my life had gotten, that my kids were in danger. She ended up telling me that if I didn't leave him, that she was going to have to call DFS because he was continuing to use meth and drink. The night that all that went down, I told God I would never use meth again, and I didn't. I haven't. So whenever the DFS lady told me, the counselor told me that I had to leave or she was going to call DFS, I did end up leaving, and I came back home, and I lived in my parents' rental house. I made a commitment to God that I would never have sex with a man until I got married to a godly man, if that were to happen. I still was addicted to pot. I used it as an antidepressant. I used it to mask all the trauma. And I was going to college at this time. I had been going to school for about 3 or 4 years at this point. So I wasn't functioning very well because of the depression. I was able to get my kids to school, and I was able to go to school, but anytime I was at home, I was just, smoking as much as I could and just sleeping and not able to get up and interact with my kids very much. And, I cried out to God, and I just asked him to heal me from the depression. And I started really spending time with the Lord in the mornings, and I realized, I remember God saying that if I wanted to marry a godly man, that he was not going to marry somebody that smoked pot all the time. So I realized I was going to have to stop. But it was really hard, and I was like, I'm just going to slowly wean myself off. And so, I started smoking less and less, and I started spending more and more time with God, especially in the mornings. I remember I would get up and listen to worship music, and I would pray, and I would read the Word, and he would just take me to these places of healing, and I slowly became better, and the depression did leave. I was going to church, and I kept praying that I would get set free from pot and that I could live a life that the Lord was pleased with. And in September of 2012, I went to the altar and I got set free. It was pretty crazy. There was deliverance, and it got pretty intense. There was definitely a stronghold in my life, a spiritual battle there. And so when I got set free from that, everything in my life changed. I was also set free from other things and healed from other things there as well, like just the addictive personality. And, I learned, it was like I instantly became a better mother. I learned about selfless love for my children, things that I didn't really understand in the Lord became really clear instantly. New revelations, just a new strength in Him that I didn't know was possible. And I started truly surrendering my life to Him. I remember just the silliest revelations that sound, well, of course, that's true, but just really understanding that His will for my life was the perfect will, and that I had been trying to do this all in my own strength and making decisions that I thought was best for me. Learning how to hear His voice and just surrendering everything I knew how to Him. The next month I started dating the man that I'm married to now. He was in the same place in his life. He had surrendered his life to the Lord. He was an ex-addict and he wanted to live for God. And we were married that next May. God has blessed us. He helped me raise my children. They're 18 and 20 now. And we have a baby that's 10 months old, which was a miracle baby in himself. I just didn't know that there was so much joy and peace in the world. I didn't know that I could live in the perfect will of God, just having His love surround me and learning to love people in a new way and learning to love my children and learning to love my husband and just feeling secure. I never had security in my life. I always hated myself. I always compared myself to other people, and just learning that I am gifted in the Lord, that He has blessed me and that He loves me. I just keep allowing Him to love me more and more every day. I know there's so much more that He has for me, and even more healing to come. It's a process. It wasn't easy. It's still not easy. You just have to keep pushing forward and keep spending that time with Him. You can't ignore your relationship with God or you will go backwards. And I'm just so blessed. God's not a respecter of persons. What He's done for me, He can do for you too. You have to truly surrender, and you have to truly believe that He has the perfect will for your life, and learn how to walk in it, learn how to hear His voice, and just not give up